Good afternoon and welcome to the second in a series of webinars addressing water, too much and too little. My name is Neil Bomberg. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor at the National Association of Regional Councils. I'm joined by Randy. And Randy, I apologize, I forgot to ask you the correct pronunciation of your last name, DeShazo?
That's right.
Okay, Randy DeShazo, Director of Planning and Research at the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council in Tampa, Florida. Today, we're going to be learning about sea level rise and what it means for the coastal United States. As the oceans rise due to a combination of melting water from glaciers and ice sheets, and thermal expansion of seawater as it warms coastal regions around this area and or around on the various coasts. The US and the world are facing flooding at unprecedented levels. And I will say this, the facts are startling. And the time we have to respond to the latest threats due to sea level rise and climate change in a larger sense are limited. By 2040, it's estimated that there could be 2 feet of sea level rise. And by 2050, there could be an additional 3 feet of sea level rise. And while those may not sound like much, they are going to transform the coastal regions of the US in ways that were never anticipated. The Tampa Bay region on Florida's west coast is one of the areas that's going to experience significant change due to sea level rise. To address this, the Tampa Bay Regional Commission has been looking, the Tampa Bay Regional Council has been looking at different ways to protect the region from the impacts of sea level rise. And today, as I noted, we're going to hear from Randy DeShazo, who will speak about what the region is planning for and doing to reduce the impact. Randy is the Director of Planning and Research at the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. At the council, he oversees the planning staff across a broad range of issue areas, including resiliency, economic development, environmental policy, and more. Randy previously worked at MPOs in California, where he focused on greenhouse gas reduction strategies for light-duty vehicles, and Illinois on freight planning, and in local government here in Florida. Randy holds a master's degree from the University of Michigan. One final note before I turn the mic over to Randy. Randy's going to speak for about 20 minutes with slides, after which there's going to be about 10 minutes left for questions and comments. At the bottom of your screens, you will note that there is a icon that says Q&A. If you click on that box, or if you click on that, a box will pop up in which you can enter your questions and comments. Please feel free to enter them at any point during Randy's presentation. And then once Randy's presentation is done, Jessica of the NARC staff will begin the Q&A and comment process. Like the previous webinar on water and future ones, we expect this webinar to last about 30 minutes. So welcome, and with that, I will turn the mic and the screen over to Randy.
Great, thank you. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Not quite yet. There we go.
Okay. All right, and off we go. All right, thank you for the introduction. Pleased to be here today. Just going to try to minimize a few things so I can see my my screen a little bit better. It's a little bit about the council. We were the first of 10 regional planning councils established in Florida. By law, we're authorized to cover anything that our local agencies ask of us. So that could also include transportation, among other things, but we are currently not the MPO. We do a lot of technical work with our MPOs, and as you'll see in the presentation, why that is relevant. Overall, we have a pretty broad reach across the middle west of the Florida coast, covering some 6 counties and more than 3 million people. But today I'm going to be talking about a problem that is of much greater interest across the country, that of sea level rise. And as you know, sea level rise poses many different kinds of risks. There's direct damage to property. There are indirect impacts to property value markets. There's problems with sea level rise and saltwater intrusion. And most importantly, at least in terms of this discussion today, there's increased vulnerability to extreme weather and the attendant costs to the economy as a result of greater frequency of extreme weather. So we'll be talking a little bit more about our study area, which is the urban core of the Tampa Bay area. The transportation management area is really a leadership group of the 3 large MPOs for each of the 3 counties that you see here, Pinellas, Pasco, and Hillsborough. And as you can see from some of the stats here, we're a pretty vulnerable area in terms of our exposure to flood risk. So some 58% of the population lives in flood zones, and so are many of our roadways also similarly exposed. And that really kind of takes us to the core of what I'm going to be talking about today, which is the particular aspect of transportation and the need for greater resiliency against sea level rise and extreme weather, as it turns out. The Tampa Bay TMA was one of 11 pilot projects awarded a grant from FHWA to do some research and analysis on resiliency measures against sea level rise. And that is important for the long-range transportation planning process under the FAST Act. That is one of the things that you want to do is take a look at your resiliency and mitigating the various stormwater impacts. So the context is the long-range transportation plan updates that were adopted fairly recently, and the grant program helped us do the analysis that was then incorporated into each of the 3 LRTPs. So in doing so, there's the required, of course, stakeholder participation. So we have a pretty broad group of agencies and members of the public who participated in helping us think about the problems that we face and how we might address them. And they'll get folded into this rather broad process that you see here, which is that we're taking as inputs models that we developed for sea level rise at 2045 at an intermediate high NOAA curve. That meant about 2 feet, a little bit more than two feet of sea level rise by 2045. And we looked at some storm surge and increased participation modeling based on some scenarios I'll get into a little bit later. Those were tested against the transportation network, which we used a travel demand model to help us look at the impacts of sea level rise and those stormwater events on the performance of the transportation system. Now, the transportation system is, of course, one of the key backbones of the regional economy. And so one of the things that we wanted to understand a little bit better was how do interruptions and increased travel times impact the regional economy. So we used an off-the-shelf model to help us think through what the economic impacts were. And as I'll get to it a little bit later on in the slideshow, we'll talk about how we use both the impacts to the transportation network as costs, and then the benefits that we would anticipate seeing from the mitigation measures on the other side of the equation to help us think through what is ultimately the best investment package for a region. So as I mentioned, we looked at several different kinds of sea level rise events. We considered different kinds of storm surge. We ultimately looked at a Category 3 hurricane hitting the Tampa Bay area and a 9-inch rain event as our primary conditions. So those two overlay under different scenarios against the 2-foot sea level rise. So this is downtown Tampa, or at least a 3D GIS model of downtown Tampa. Sunny day. Imagine this landscape in 2045, but with 2 feet of sea level rise, and then followed by a Category 3 storm. So as you can see, much of downtown is inundated, and there's likely to be a great deal of lost property and, of course, lost life. Same thing goes for Newport Richey, one of the larger cities in Pasco County. It sits astride the main north-south corridor, US 19, and the main east-west corridor in Pasco County, SR 54. And so fast forwarding there too, you can see lots of flooding, especially on the northern part of the image that you see here. Gulf Boulevard, Pinellas County, you see a lot of this kind of development on the barrier island, condos, hotels, sandy beaches, a lot of it gets swept away in the event that we're talking about. So what is also occurring, of course, is that the roadways are also inundated for periods of time. We looked at various kinds of scenarios if that happens just for a couple of days, if it happens over the course of a week, or if there's some serious roadway damage and the road is put out of commission for a month. We looked at various kinds of impact scenarios that we'll get into. But of course, it's not just those areas. In fact, the entire region is exposed. And what you'll see here is some of the thought process that we went through, things that are roadways that are critical, those that are highly vulnerable. I apologize if you hear the ambient noise. Just bear with me for just a second. There's several of these roadways are highly vulnerable, and so we went through a process of selecting out some representative projects. So some of those include bridges, the highway, US 19, and what you'll see here in this particular chart is that you get a bit of a summary of what's happening throughout the 3 counties. Some 60% of the roads in Pinellas are inundated, and smaller amounts in the other 2 counties. So Pinellas is by far the most exposed of the 3 counties, but overall, a lot of the region faces some significant exposure. About 28% roads are impacted by a Category 3 storm, plus the sea level rise scenario we discussed. So again, those representative projects, they're shown in the highlighted colors. The Gandy Bridge, which is about the lower middle half of the screen, connects Tampa to St. Petersburg, and then Pinellas on the far left side on the screen, you'll see like a little strip of road in blue. That's Gulf Boulevard. That's one of the main evacuation routes for part of the county. Then Pasco County, the US 19 and SR 54 that I mentioned before. All right, let's see, I'm gonna stop for a second. I hear some questions in the Q&A. Let's see, okay, I'll come back to those later. All right, so going on to adaptation, I won't spend much time on this, just that these are some of the ways that we thought about how we might approach sea level rise. Let's see. Screen is stuck. There we go. All right. So we looked at a wide range of potential investments. raising the road profile, doing various enhancements to the roadway itself, improving drainage, including off-site kinds of improvement in terms of vegetation and seawalls and other things that might help with keeping the roads clear at the critical times. So, sorry, I went back. So just a few examples of some of the things that we looked at. Hardened shoulders, wave attenuation, again, all of these other things are off-site. And then we went through a costing process to get a sense of what the cost would be to make these improvements. Some of these are not that expensive, others were tremendously expensive. But what we did is we needed to think about how do we compare the costs and benefits. So what we did is we considered that the investments are costs, and that's one side of the equation. The benefits are not lost property or access to property. They don't refer to the lost assets themselves. The benefits are the avoided costs. And in that sense, we needed to have a better understanding of how, if service on a particular roadway segment is interrupted, how does that influence commute times and economic costs for businesses. And so we used an off-the-shelf model to help us think about, one, what is the impact of a lost facility on the economy? And then if that loss is avoided, is essentially our benefit. And so we use that to compare what our costs and benefits were. And just to give you a little sense of what that looked like, the Getty Boulevard Bridge, this is the main bridge connecting Tampa and St. Petersburg. And what you see here, these colored lines are different scenarios for length of impact. So if it's a relatively short impact of 2 days, it's about $100 million cost to the value of the economy, the gross regional product of the economy. And if the bridge is completely destroyed, which can easily happen, we're talking about a loss over a year of $3.5 billion to the economy, which is about 1% of the region's gross regional product. And again, gross regional product is one way of talking about the overall output of an economy, much as GDP is for the United States. So Gulf Boulevard, again, along the coast, pretty expensive impacts and become gradually more damaging as those impacts increase under scenarios where the roadway is put out of commission. Same thing for SR 54, and I won't kill much more time on this. So just to do a little bit of the comparisons that we looked at, the blue column there, the dark blue column is the gross regional product lost over various periods of time compared to the rebuild cost. So we want to get a sense of at what point does it become urgent to go ahead and invest in a road, or if it's a more valuable to go ahead and invest or not invest. In some cases, when we looked at the total number of projects put together as a package, it didn't really pencil out. So that meant having to go back and rethink the overall list of projects in terms of how we would distribute future dollars. So just summarizing here, these were data that we produced to put into asset management plans, and then through specific plans and programs, bridges and culvert replacements, and use those to incorporate into the long-range transportation plan, which the MPOs themselves took on their own to get adopted. And those 3 MPOs were on the same adoption cycle, and it was just recently adopted last year, actually. Anyway, that's the sum of what I was going to say, and I'm happy to take questions.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, I will kick things off with the Q&A. Again, folks, if you do have questions, please enter them into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. The first question is, how do you address the politics of sea level rise, since we know that not everyone believes that sea level rise is actually happening?
This is a tough one, especially in a state where there is a lot of questions about climate change and whether or not it's occurring or not. But people do see that there are increasingly frequent storms and there's increasingly frequent flooding, and that when you put those together, people may not necessarily accept the need to prepare for sea level rise, but they do accept the need to vote to plan for increased risks of extreme weather. And so that is essentially how their consent was bought.
And do you find that changing some of the messaging around sea level rise has helped?
Yeah, I think it is, even in cases where there is some significant doubt about the data or what the data actually mean. Changing the narrative to suit the audience a little bit, to fit it to what is most immediately important to them, while of course being consistent with what you're doing, it actually resonates a lot with audiences.
Oh, could you bring up the slide on costs for each option?
Yeah. Let's see. Was
Just
it
so
this
everyone,
one? Was it this one?
I'm not sure.
It could be this one. I'm not sure which one which slide we're.
Yeah, Tara, if you wanna, let's which one?
This one. Okay. So this would be, I'm pretty sure this is per mile.
Yes, that's the slide I was asking about. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we can certainly send this presentation out. We are recording this webinar and it will be posted on our YouTube page if that helps. But I will go ahead and continue on. The next question we have is, how do you know that the data you are using is accurate?
So that's complicated because we're using models piled on top of models, piled on top of models. And the extent that you get past traffic counts and things that you can verify with your eye, there's a lot of modeling that goes on here. And so probably the best approach we see with this is to think about it in terms of probabilities. We don't know that a storm is coming, but that is clearly one of the scenarios that we looked at, and what time period and how much damage and wind speed, so on and so forth. So you have to make assumptions, and you lay out what those assumptions are, and you make it clear that that's an assumption rather than a data point. And then you have to run through multiple scenarios to put together more of a scenario-based approach to thinking about this, that it's a range of potential impacts rather than, oh, it's got to be this much in that time period.
Great. I have two more questions and then we will wrap things up. The next question is, how do you work with your board of elected officials? How did they respond to your projections? And did they all accept the results of your research and findings?
So Our particular board is made up of elected officials, obviously from local governments, and basically what we do with them is we present an initial set of results to them, and then when the opportunity arises and at their expression of interest, we go to their local boards. In some cases, elected officials on our board are competent or empowered to go ahead and make a statement or a vote on behalf of their local commission. In other cases, they feel that they need to have the council to present to their local board and make the case. And that is often how we obtain consent from those members. And with regard to, do they all accept the results of our research and findings? No, they do not.
That can be tough. The last question before we wrap things up is, do you have any risk or resiliency plans around the algae blooms?
What you should ask.
I know that's not the topic of today's webinar, but it is certainly relevant.
What I'll say about it is that, as I think many people know, we're currently having quite the red tide episode. And we're holding meetings with all of our local partners to actually kind of develop a strategy for dealing with this. So I don't have an answer for you right now, other than we're trying to coordinate how we address, at the very least, cleanup. So in the last round that we had of red tide, I think in 2016, action was not coordinated. And so one county, Pinellas, took a lot of proactive action and ultimately saved themselves a lot of money. Other counties were not quite as prepared and ran into problems with cleanup later. So the long and short of it is, this is what we're trying to avoid this time around, and so it's an ongoing set of conversations, probably even tomorrow, where we're hoping to get some sort of conclusion with it.
Great, great. And thank you so much for today's webinar. It was great information. All
right. Thank you very much.
Let me join Jess in saying thank you very much for the outstanding presentation. In case anyone noticed or no one noticed, you did step in for Sean Sullivan, the executive director of Tampa Bay, due to the sudden change in his schedule. And we really thank you for stepping in so late in the game and providing us with this excellent presentation.